God has called us to be supermen and superwomen of this generation. Young people, that's the charge on your life. Let no one despise thy youth, but be thou an example. That eliminates the responsibility, well, I'm just being young. You know, talking about this earlier. Well, that's just the way they are. Does that make it right? They're just naturally rude and obnoxious. So does that make it any less of manners? Well, they're always late. That's just because that's who they are. Does that make that excusable? There are no excuses. No excuses. Who are you? Which character are you? The Bible is filled with superheroes. There's Joshua who defeats Jericho, Samson who demonstrates extraordinary strength, David who defeats a giant, Daniel who slept with the lions, Gideon who defeated thousands with 300 men, Peter who walked on water, Jesus who raised Lazarus from the dead, and many, many more miracles. Then there's Paul who gets bit by a poisonous snake and lives, Peter and John who pray for a crippled man who gets healed. There are all kinds of superheroes in the Bible. But God's looking for someone to be one today. So I want to talk to you about walking in the supernatural. The first thing that we find about walking in the supernatural is there is a source of power. What is the source of power? The best way that I think I can explain this is that God puts a super on your natural. He takes who you are and applies a super to it. Kind of like taking an acoustic guitar and then plugging it into an amp. Gets just a little bit more output. Paul summed it up best when he said this in 2 Corinthians 12:10. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then he is strong. What did Paul mean here? When I get to the end of my abilities, when I get to the end of what Neil's able to do, God can. When we get to where my limits stop me, God can. I can do all things through Christ. When I get to where I don't know anything else, God can take control. 1 Corinthians 2:4-5 says, my message and my preaching were not with wise and persuasive words, but with the demonstration of the Spirit's power, so that your faith may not rest on men's wisdom, but on God's power. Then in 1 Corinthians 4:20, for the kingdom of God is not a matter of talk, but of power. Power. There's the word again. It's going to keep popping up. Power. What's the next thing about walking into the supernatural? The price of being a superhero. I mentioned earlier. Do you think that some people thought Superman was just a little bit strange in that getup? What if you thought, if you saw that walking down the street, he's got on blue pantyhose and a red Speedo? Most of us wouldn't be a little bit afraid of what he could do. Man, I'll pop that punk in the eye. Look at him. Then there's Batman. Then there's Robin. I mean, look at the superheroes, at the way they're. You don't think that there's a price that they had to pay to be a superhero? 1 Peter 4:1-4 say this. Therefore, since Christ suffered for us in the flesh, arm yourselves also with the same mind. For he who has suffered in the flesh has ceased from sin, that he no longer should live the rest of his time in the flesh for the lust of men, but for the will of God. For we have spent enough of our past lifetime in doing the will of the Gentiles, when we walked in lewdness, lust, drunkenness, revelries, drinking, parties, and abominable idolatry. In regard to these, they think it strange that you do not run with them in the same flood of dissipation, speaking evil of you. Some people are going to think it is strange when you take a stand to live for God. There are an awful lot of people that are going to question your stance. But who do people call when they need help? Guess whom they're going to call when they're in a crisis? I am amazed, and I've got family members on both sides that do this same thing. It's amazing at how spiritual people can become when there's a traumatic situation that's knocking on their door. It's amazing at how people blame God for everything until there's a real big problem. Then all of a sudden, God, where are you? Can you help me? Guard against your weaknesses. It's great when we walk in the power of God, but there's one thing that could bring Superman to his knees. Kryptonite. Kryptonite, the one thing that would just completely make him melt. In its presence, Superman lost all his power. He was defenseless. Bullets could no longer bounce off of his chest. As believers, we are all faced with a kryptonite. It is better known as sin. In the last part of this message, I'm going to give you 5 steps for walking in victory over your kryptonite so that you can be free in the power of God. So, freedom over kryptonite. To walk in the power of God, what do we know? Step 1 is this. You've got to determine your vulnerable areas. What is it that just gets to you? What is the one area where you continually get tripped up? If you struggle with eating pizza, if pizza was a sin, you don't need to hang outside Papa John's. The same way the alcoholic who says, well, it's just social drinking. I didn't inhale. And he was our president. We justify the things that we like to. But what's the one area that trips you up? Should be the one area that we pretty much stay away from. But what is the one sin that seems to have you asking for forgiveness the most? What's the one thing that you really have to beg God to forgive you for? You know, my first one is sarcasm. God, check my attitude. I have got a quick mouth. Watch that thing. What is the one area that you are the weakest in? See, the key to being a Superman or a Superwoman for God is to know your weak areas. Samson and David's weakness was women. Ananias and Sapphira was lying. What kryptonite is in your life? There are 3 areas that are kryptonite: people, places, and possessions. Once you have identified your kryptonite, you are on the road to victory over them. Who are the people in your life that keep tripping you up? The people you probably shouldn't hang around with. Some of you came back from Winterfest so fired up, and you know what? There's some went to Winterfest I hadn't seen since. You know why? They come right back from Winterfest, get right back with the same bunch and doing the same things over again. Going to the same places. And you wonder why you get in trouble. It doesn't take the intelligence of Superman to figure that one out. The possession, the one thing that you place over God, the one thing you just can't give up. Maybe it's the computer, cell phone, car, even a relationship that's become possessive. Step 2, depart from it. Proverbs 4:27 says, do not swerve to the right or the left. Keep your foot from evil. See, when Potiphar's wife started coming on to Joseph, what did he do? He ran. He ran. He wanted to get away from her. He knew if he stayed, he was going to lose his power. That was going to be his kryptonite. Step 3, defend yourself against it. You have got to set up guardrails in your life, or you'll end up going off into the ditch. Build a moat around your castle. Bowling. Bowling is not something that I am good at. It's not something that I'm decent at. But I love to watch when they let little kids bowl. You see what they do? They'll put these, they call them bumpers, I think. They put these bumper things up to where you can just throw the ball however, and it's going to hit the pins. I thought, I want to play on that lane. I can do a little bit better over there. But we got those. We've got to set up our spiritual life the same way. You know, if I've got Howie on this side and Chris on this side being my bumper, I'm not going astray. Hey, man, get back in the lane. There's some pins down there. There's giants down there. We've got to knock them down. Stay in the lane. Stay in. We've got to set those guardrails up for us. In 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 20, Paul told Timothy this: guard what has been entrusted to your care. One of the main ways that Superman stayed clear of kryptonite was that his friends warned him of the danger. His friends knew his weakness and they helped him overcome. 1 Corinthians 5:11 says, but now I am writing you that you must not associate with anyone who calls himself a brother but is sexually immoral or greedy, an idolater or a slanderer, a drunkard or a swindler. With such a man do not eat. It is often our so-called Christian friends that lead us right into our weak areas of sin. Well, come on, it'll be okay. Because this day and age, everybody's a Christian. Everybody's wearing the suit. I could have come out tonight with that full suit on, and you know what? I still don't think I'd have tried flying from here to the back of the sanctuary. I still don't think I would have allowed anybody in here to take a pistol and shoot at me.